Welcome to Fear No Evil, where Psalms 23 is my foundational scripture, and where the Lord or Yeshua is my shepherd at all times. Now, I just want to finish the studies that I was going over, but before I do, my quote of the day is "Courage leads to heaven and fear to death," and that was written by Seneca, Seneca. Now, I remember when I started to talk about a possible connection between homosexuality and child sexual abuse, and I was attacked verbally all the time. And some of those attacks were also of physical violence. So I used to get very afraid to talk about it. But it's been a couple years now, and because I am so convinced of the connection, I am no longer afraid. And so I will continue to speak about the connection, because I do feel that there is a connection. And I'm not speaking just for myself as a sexual abuse survivor. I'm also speaking for all those other sexual abuse survivors. Now, we know that child sexual abuse is not the only thing that may contribute to homosexuality, because there are a lot of sexual abuse survivors who are not homosexual. So it is not correct or scientific to say that homosexuality or that child sexual abuse causes homosexuality. That is not the argument. The opposition is that child sexual abuse may be a contributing factor to those who identify as homosexual, who also have child sexual abuse history in their backgrounds. That is what I'm saying, and that is what I feel that the science shows. Now, after the genetic linkage studies, we have the genome-wide association studies with male orientation. Now, a study was done by Alan S. Sanders, Gary W. Beecham, and Edom R. Martin. And they did a study on 1,077 homosexual men, 1,231 heterosexual men of European ancestry. Just because you did a study and had these many men, they are of European ancestry. This study does not represent all the members of the LGBT community. I'm so finished with these homosexual studies, because each one wants to say that they have found a link to genetics to say that people are born gay. And this is not what the study shows. Just because you want to manipulate the words or manipulate the studies. And if you read some of these studies, the average person would not even have a clue to what they are saying. They are written in a way that the average lay person would not be able to understand what they are saying. Now, every study of discipline has its own language, and there are studies written in their own language of that profession. But if you want the average person who hasn't studied that profession to understand what you're saying, then you have to take out the big words that nobody knows what you're saying. Now, the problem with these studies are we have XQ28 in one study, chromosome 8 in another study, chromosome 13 and 14 in another study, but they are unable to link all of these studies, and they are unable to understand what the XQ28 on the X chromosome actually means. Now, they said in this study that the chromosome 13 was a neurodevelopmental gene. Remember that word, neurodevelopmental gene, because they want to be able to say that they are born this way. However, they are unable to link all of these genes together. Or if they're able to link some of the chromosomes together, they are unable to link XQ28, which is the very first chromosome on the X chromosome, the first region on the X chromosome, that they are able to find a similarity among homosexual men. But just because the men were white does not make it representative, especially globally, of everyone who identifies as homosexual. Another thing you will notice with the homosexual studies, they're also for males. Now, if you study the childhood sexual abuse studies, they are for females. And just because something may be true for a male who identifies as homosexual, it does not make it true for the female who identifies as homosexual. You have to have consistency in these studies before you can even say that people who are gay are born this way. Now, if you're actually talking to people out there, they do believe that people are born gay. Why? Because if you read these studies, they want to make it sound like that they have found something significant to point to. But the closest they are able to come is to a predisposition linked up with something environmental. So that environmental factor cannot just be child sexual abuse. Because some LGBT members are not child sexual abuse survivors. What percentage? We don't even know. All these studies are being done today on guns, opioid abuse. That's great. How about child sexual abuse? We act like we have this topic mastered when we're not even at the elementary level yet of understanding childhood sexual abuse. Now, these studies are just ridiculous. They really are. Because even when they did the studies and found some similarities, the samples were small. Small. And so if you have a small sample, you also have to explain what's going on with the majority of the individuals that you have studied. And the studies don't like to do that. And if you try to say that there's any linkage to childhood sexual abuse, the LGBT wants to come out saying it's hate speech. It is not hate speech. Look at the studies. There's no way you can justify even saying that there might be a connection to hate speech. And stop telling child sexual abuse survivors that they can't talk about it in public, that they have to be somewhere in a psychiatrist's office to talk about it. They could talk about it if they want to. I can't think of anything else in childhood that alters a child's life more than child sexual abuse. And in order to bring other child sexual abuse survivors out, child sexual abuse survivors who are healing or have healed or continue on healing need to speak about it. Talk about a revolution. If we had a revolution in understanding child sexual abuse, we'd have a revolution globally in the mental health of the people who walk this earth. Because we forget that in America, 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. And that the boys report it even less. As we saw Katy Perry kiss a young boy and there was no outrage. Why? Because in society we see child sexual abuse differently when it comes to boys. You sit there and witness abuse. Very borderline, but it's still abuse. And there's no outrage. But we celebrate Katy Perry. We got a problem in society. And when Stormy Daniels can say that she didn't want to have sex with the president, but she did anyways, did anybody ask her? Again, is she a child sexual abuse survivor? Because if she is, very easy to just have sex. And these studies do not show that people are born gay. What they show is that some people will identify as gay. Some people are going to have an attraction to their same sex. And if child sexual abuse is one of those contributing factors, then we have to understand why. Because not everyone who is a child sexual abuse survivor identifies as homosexual later on in their life. They also may identify as bisexual. They also may identify as heterosexual.